Hello and welcome to the Unnamed Automotive Podcast. My name is Sami Hatchback, and with me, as always, is my good friend and fellow automotive journalist, Benjamin Hunting. Say hi to the people, Ben.
Greetings, human listeners.
Greetings to everyone. If this is the first time you're listening to our podcast, thank you for trying something new. I will reiterate, Ben and I are a pair of automotive journalists, but more important than that, we're very good friends. Isn't that right, Ben?
Affirmative.
We're such good friends that I'd like Ben to take over the podcast and
take over.
Take it over. It's all yours now. I've left it to you in my will.
Is it like a living will?
Yes.
Does that mean I get to decide what treatment options we proceed with?
That's right. Yes.
Okay, I'm into that.
But I'd like you to take it over right now so you can tell our listeners where to find your latest work. Can you do that for me, Ben?
There's nothing I like more than crushing responsibility.
I know. That's why I gave it to you.
Yeah, it's a little treat for me.
It is.
a little pre-treatment treat. You can find my work at Motor Trend, at Haggerty, and at Inside Hook.
And you can find my work at autotrader.ca, driving.ca, and Capital One's Auto Navigator page. Ben, we've got some cars to talk about. Compact cars to talk about today. It's like a compact car podcast, compact car cast.
Well, we talked about a car last week too, so I guess that we're on a bit of a cars kick, which is nice because, it's almost always SUVs, and these serve as, I guess you could call them palate cleansers. They remind us of what it used to be like to drive.
I completely forgot about what we talked about last week. Is that
the,
okay?
The
yes, the Subaru BRZ TS.
You own a BRZ.
Pardon?
You own a BRZ.
I own a Scion FRS, of course.
I was unaware there was a difference. Or
that
this podcast recognized that difference.
Yes, you were unaware about our podcast recognizing it. We've got compact cars to talk about today.
That's right.
Compact cars are one of the most interesting segments in the marketplace because they go through so many ups and downs, in my opinion, that there are so many generations of compact cars that are worth passing over, and then there's a couple that are like, oh, this is when they finally decided to take this segment seriously, and then for a while the automaker will just coast on that for a while.
And the compact car I'm talking about specifically used to be a subcompact car.
Yes, that's fair.
And then what happened to every car happened to this one, and it became a compact car. It graduated, even though its name suggests that it should have stayed subcompact. I'm talking specifically about the 2025 Mini Cooper. And even more specifically, the Mini Cooper S. So, Sami, this is all new for 2025. It still rides on the same platform as before, the UKL1 platform, which I learned today stands for Untere Klasse, which is lower class in German, according to Wikipedia. So, lower class platform Mini. But I mention this because it's shared with BMW. The smaller, but not too small, 1 Series, 2 Series, X1, X2, all of that rides on a version of the UKL platform that's expanded somewhat versus the Mini Cooper one. So there's the UKL one for the Cooper, the convertible, or the hatch, Sorry, the hatch and the Cooper are the same thing.
Right.
But the entry-level versions of the Mini, and then everything else in the Mini lineup, I believe, rides on UKL2 along with the BMW stuff.
Okay. Yes, and
this is interesting to me because you and I have had varying opinions about that platform with a BMW badge, right?
Yes.
It seems like the larger version of the platform is not quite as engaging as maybe it could have been. Not saying it's a bad platform to build a car on, but we were big fans of the original X2. And I believe that one, excuse me, I'm just double checking this. Oh, maybe that one's always been on UKL2. Anyway, it's evolved into this kind of do everything, sort of buy it for the badge type platform for BMW versus the more focused go-kart-like handling that the Mini Cooper and the Cooper convertible were kind of known for. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I've always appreciated, I think, the fact that, BMW and Mini have shared this platform for a few generations now, right?
Yeah, I think it started back in 2014.
And I think the Countryman was probably the first shared platform. Is that fair to say? I'm not sure.
I don't remember exactly. I know that the Cooper was 2014. The Countryman was actually after that. It was in 2017.
Oh, okay. And to me, it felt like it was improving the refinement of those minis. But then I think the byproduct of that was that the minis stopped feeling like minis. Like they
Yeah.
just became a little bit more like bigger. They felt a little less agile and goofy. And then on the other end, the BMWs never inherited any of the characteristics from sharing, uh, powertrains or not powertrains, platforms with the Mini product. So
Yeah,
they
it
never
never
became
there was never
super.
cross pollination, that's for sure.
Yeah, and
But
I think that's yeah.
I think that's because BMW has a very strict idea of what it wants its cars to come across as.
BMW the brand or
Yes,
BMW
the
group?
brand.
Okay. And oh yeah, I think that's fair. I think they've always I mean, to me the 2 Series it's called the Grand Coupe, I think it's called now, or something like
I
that.
can't remember. And it's important to note too that in North America, all the BMW versions are all-wheel drive.
Yes, that is very important to note because that changes things too a lot in terms of packaging and maybe weight with how these vehicles feel on the road. Because to me, like old minis have they have a charm to them, they have a responsiveness to them. They always are. They used to be capable of kind of making you feel something either with the drive, with the design, or the interior kind of like whimsy. I think that's the best word for it. And it's very rare today to get cars with whimsy because I think when you're spending so much money, you want a car that confirms that it is indeed a transportation device and an operation of, it's supposed to get you somewhere before anything else.
So I want to touch on.
I'm terrified that, in their effort to like make these cars better, they've removed the element that one would buy them in the first place.
So I want to touch on 3 of the things that you've mentioned in your diatribe about,
Of course,
the Cooper evolution. You talked about price, you talked about refinement, and you talked about whimsy. Mm-hmm. So the Cooper S, it's all new, and the way in this case, all new refers to some pretty dramatic styling changes for the car. The thing that most people are going to notice, I think, is at the rear of the car, the taillights are almost completely different. They've kind of shifted to this. You get a horizontal, like a bar of black plastic that goes across, and then the taillights, they're almost like, I guess, triangles now.
Okay.
Fairly different. I believe in the past, Minis always had kind of like an oval taillight, like a stretched oval. So that's gone. And as a result, the hatch design is completely different too. So if you were to park them side by side with a previous, like a 2024 or 2023, you're really going to see the difference there. Up front, there's changes too, but I think it's more subtle. It's got kind of a stretched out proboscis kind of feel, like the nose, almost like it has a snout now.
Okay.
And having a big body colored bar across the grille on the S really draws attention to that.
Okay.
I think that what's lost is some of the square proportions that we had on the older minis. Those have been gone for a while. And I think this car kind of cements it. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I think that overall it's still a pretty successful design from a I guess, aesthetic standpoint.
Yeah. Do you mind if I talk about that exterior design? I mean, is it okay for a product such as the Mini and the Mini Cooper that has been around for a long time and has sported a similar, design philosophy for a long time to suddenly like change it up? I mean, the Porsche 911 has been around for what, 50 years or 60 years. And, you take a look at a 911 from the first generation to the current one, and you can still tell that it's a 911.
You can still tell that this is a Mini Cooper. Like, it's not that dramatic, but the problem with any kind of retro influence design is you can't evolve it.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly it. Yeah.
You end up with what happened to the Camaro, which kind of started out looking like a late 60s version when the 5th generation arrived. And then by the time the Camaro left this model year, it had been so anonymized that there was not a lot linking it with its heritage. So I don't think the Mini is doing that.
Can I just take a quick tangent about that, retro design influence and how that traps designers, and then now they don't know what to do. Like the Challenger and Charger had that, like the Dodge Challenger and Dodge Charger have that retro influence, but then now they've got
the Challenger did. I don't think the Charger did.
And then they've got this new one, what's it called? The Daytona EV?
No idea.
I don't know what it's called, but the this upcoming generation of these cars,
Yes,
looks like nothing, right?
yeah. I mean, the thing about the Challenger was Chrysler didn't have any money to change it.
Yeah.
So what they did when they did their big mid-cycle refresh was change a lot of the lighting.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a really great move by the company because you ended up with a car that had a fairly original and unique lighting profile that would not only separated it from the car that came before, but also from other muscle cars out there on the road. And then Chrysler was also able to distract us by, you know, throwing insane horsepower under the hood, like on a seemingly yearly basis. So that was their strategy for moving ahead with their retro design. But it did essentially look very similar from what, 2008 to 2024, 2023.
Well, especially the Challenger.
Yeah,
right?
but I don't think the Charger is a retro design. It doesn't look like any.
Sorry, I should have just clarified just the Challenger.
But anyway, getting back to the Mini.
Yep.
The benefits of this redesign, and I guess the little bit of stretching out that we're seeing, is the interior is really spacious, and I don't mean spacious for a Mini. It just feels like airy, almost like there's a considerable amount of headroom that I wouldn't have expected. The sightlines are pretty good. Where you sit in the car is kind of weird because there's so much glass beside you that kind of stretches behind you that you're really reminded that you're not sitting in an SUV, because there are not really any two-door SUVs out there right now. I mean, you have the Bronco and you have the Wrangler, but those doors are designed to be removed so they're as small as possible. They don't stretch back into the bodywork. And you have this two-door hatchback here that is giving you a longer door than you would expect from such a squared off design. And it's really cool. I would also want to segue into my favorite part of the car, which is the interior design itself. I wasn't expecting this because a lot of the time when you're looking at a compact car, even luxurious compact cars, they cut corners in terms of the materials that are used inside. And
they phone it in.
Yeah, they don't. Well, I don't know if they phone it in, but there's just cost cutting, right? Like, this isn't a car that they can charge a huge amount of money for, so they can't necessarily make a profit if they make it too nice inside. But Mini's pricing strategy is so different from every other, or well, not as different as I originally thought. We'll get to that later when we talk about some of the cars that you've been driving lately.
Yeah.
But different enough that this car had so much detail inside. There's a bunch of stuff that I really liked. First of all, it's not just like piano black everywhere and plastic and gloss. They actually use textiles, fabrics that you can reach out and touch on things like the dashboard, even the steering wheel. The third spoke in the steering wheel is a fabric strap that connects the hub to the wheel itself. It's super cool. And then on the passenger side, they have a similar fabric strap on the dash, just like merged into the dashboard itself. It's a great balance for the interior. You have these elements that aren't there haphazardly, that they're creating this cohesive theme. It also has like a dash that lights up from the inside in kind of it's almost like you're looking at, one of those
backlit kind of?
Yeah, it's backlit, but like you're looking at a Himalayan salt lamp. You know what I'm talking about?
No, what are you talking
So
about?
You know how you can get those?
Oh, yes. No, I do know.
It's like a rock.
Yes, I do know.
It looks like a rock,
Yeah.
and it lights up from the inside. And so the light that comes out of it is diffused through, I guess, millions of years of tectonic pressure or whatever. The Mini kind of has that vibe where the light isn't from any one specific source, and you can change the colors and all that stuff.
Cool.
But all that to say, I really think the interior is the strongest part of this car. It's head and shoulders above what I expected, and it felt comfortable, it felt upscale, and it felt welcoming. But there's a huge asterisk, Sami, for that interior.
Yeah.
And that's the infotainment system and the gauge cluster, or lack of a gauge cluster. And this is where I think Mini has really shot itself in the foot with this car. It's absolutely the worst part of the experience.
Really?
It really is, for two reasons.
Oh, man. Okay, so my understanding, hold on, I just want to make sure this is clear. There's no gauge cluster anymore. Everything is embedded in this massive circular infotainment screen, right?
Except there's an HUD which serves as a gauge cluster.
Oh, really?
But it's not a real HUD. It's a fold-up piece of plastic from the dashboard.
You tricked me.
Yeah, and it projects onto that plastic. And the reason why that sucks is because the dashboard is really visible behind the plastic. And depending on your viewing angle, like how tall you are and how you have the seat adjusted, it's going to affect how easily you can see the information that's being displayed and how distracted you are by, you know, the black plastic, or not plastic, sorry, the black fabric or different colored textiles of the dashboard itself.
Yeah.
How hard would it have been to give it a normal HUD? Probably not that hard, right?
Yeah, I guess so. But it would have increased the cost. I mean, I think in the regular...
Is that really a problem for Mini, as we'll get to in a little bit?
Fair.
Anyway, I really disliked it. You eventually get used to it, but it feels completely out of place in a car that is otherwise very well designed in terms of the elements that you're exposed to from behind the wheel. Getting to the infotainment system, though, the reason why there's no gauge cluster and why they can just have this very small piece, I would say like 5 inches across, is because there's a giant circular infotainment screen in the middle of the car. And
it's striking. I like it.
Well, you like it until it's time to use it, because the software that's installed on this system is incredibly slow, maddeningly slow. Going from one screen to the other is an exercise in patience and frustration, but it becomes a big issue because of how Mini has decided to organize various features of the car.
Okay.
When you get into the car, can I just
my first impression is that there's like these like they try to put corners on a circle.
Well, I'd rather just can I walk you through what it's like to actually drive this car first?
Yeah, hit me.
So when you get into the car, it does one of two things. First, it asks you to scan a QR code so you can set up your Mini account if you don't have a Mini account set up. I don't have that account set up. Whatever.
Right.
I just don't think that that's a message you need to be showing every single time you start the car. It's not necessary. Maybe have a setup system for people who want to set up that feature. But if you're lending this car to a friend or something like that, they're going to have to go through this. It's going to be confusing. But the real reason this is problematic is because the Mini relies on individual profiles for the car. My car came with 3 driver profiles: guest, driver 1, driver 2. My mistake was when I first got into the car, I selected driver 2. And then I added all of the things about the car that I wanted to use, like my cell phone system linking through Bluetooth, my Android Auto, the various preferences for like where the seat is positioned and whatnot. I added all of that under the driver 2 profile. Normally that wouldn't be a problem because a lot of cars have these profile systems, and it's linked to, sometimes it's linked to the key, or sometimes it just keeps the driver profile that was last selected when the car was shut off and makes you change it if you are a different driver. The way the Mini works is you get in, it flashes the screen with the QR code, then that's replaced by the screen to select the driver profile, which is then replaced by a screen telling you to buckle your seatbelt.
Okay.
If you haven't buckled your seatbelt, you can't choose the driver profile. But if you buckle your seatbelt after you've seen that message, you also can't choose your driver profile because it's taken too long and the car has defaulted to a guest profile. So at this point, I have to go down into the the bottom of the circle, push the profile button to launch that screen again and select the profile that matches me. All of this is happening at the same time as the fact that my seat is in a weird exit position because Mini hasn't loaded the seats yet. So I'm still stuck too far away from the dashboard, too far away from the steering wheel. And if I try to use the hard buttons on the side of the seat where you can also save the seat profile, they get locked out. I've actually been in a situation where I was unable to change the seat or access the memory seats because the infotainment system was locked in some kind of weird cycle where it was trying to load the driver profile. A friend of the podcast considered buying a Cooper S, and he told me after his test drive, he walked away from it because he was so frustrated with trying to use the infotainment system. And that was just on like a 20-minute test drive.
Right.
Once you're actually trying to use the car on a daily basis, everything that I just described to you is maddening.
Yeah, of course.
It is super annoying. And the logic of the infotainment system's menus coming from the top, the sides, the bottom, it's really hard to parse, hard to figure out where everything is. It's like they tried to simplify things, but removed features that you would normally be using on a regular basis. Like the climate control system, pretty difficult to use if you want anything other than changing temperature. If you want to change like the auto setting for the fan or the fan speed or anything like that, it's a real problem to get into that. So that really
other thing is you sent me a photo of you using it with Android Auto, right?
Yeah.
And it just like doesn't use up. I mean, obviously, Android Auto is not designed for a circular.
No, you get a square
interface.
in the middle of a big circle. It looks kind of silly.
It looks silly, yeah.
The other problem I had with Android Auto was it continually disconnected, or I would be listening to streaming content and it would skip. It would stop. Ooh. And then it would reconnect, but like 5 seconds had gone by in the podcast I was listening to. And I hadn't had this problem with a previous BMW I had driven with Android Auto Wireless. It didn't change when I plugged it in. A couple of times it would say weak signal for Android Auto Wireless, try plugging in. And I was plugged in. So I don't know.
Oh my God.
I don't know what it was trying to get to, but it was constant issue. And sometimes it would just disappear completely, would disconnect and then reconnect. The vehicle I'm in this week, exact same phone, I'm not having those problems. So, okay. Or at least not at the same level. So overall, huge fly in the ointment. This do everything system that just can't do everything.
That's brutal. Okay. Infotainment system is a miss, especially, which is a shame because the interior of the Mini is among
it's so great.
It's the most really interesting parts of it. But yes. if you have to interface with this infotainment system every day, all day, and in a variety of, there's so few controls, like physical controls, that you have to do everything through the screen.
There's almost no physical controls.
Yeah, you have to do everything through the screen.
Yeah, I would, maybe this is something that can be fixed with a software update. It's not outside the realm of the possible for Mini to improve this, so I'm not going to completely give up on it, but I just felt very frustrated by it. The other aspects of the car are pretty good in terms of the drive. There are a couple of weird details that I think keep the Mini from being a car I would recommend to everybody. The vehicle comes with a 2-liter turbocharged, I believe it's a 4-cylinder for this year. Let me double check on that.
Because
checking. Yeah, it's a 4-cylinder.
I think the entry-level models use a 3.
I don't know if it's a 3. I know the horsepower difference suggests it is a 3 because the base
Cooper, used to be the case, right?
The base Cooper comes with, I think, 161 or 160 horsepower. The Cooper S steps up to 201 horsepower and 221 pound-feet of torque. Those are totally okay numbers, especially for a car that weighs 3,100 pounds. It's not super heavy. It's not super light. It's kind of right on the border of being a tossable, sporty kind of car.
Cool.
The weird thing about the drivetrain, though, is it's a 7-speed automatic transmission with no paddle shifters.
Huh?
Yeah, that's my response too, because the S it's marketed as the performance version.
The enjoyable one.
Yeah, the not like the Hair on Fire John Cooper Works version, but the one you're going to have fun with on a back road. And I'm not really a paddle shifter guy. On larger cars, it's not something. I mean, modern automatic transmissions are so good, I rarely feel the need to intervene. But the Mini has a personality where it's kind of trying to get you to drive along. Like it's trying to involve you in the driving process more than most other compact cars. And I would find myself reaching for paddle shifters and there's just nothing there. I'm just like tapping on the back of the steering wheel. And there's not even, so the shifting for the car, it's done via a toggle underneath the infotainment system where you just toggle up for reverse and then toggle down for drive, and there's a button for park. So you can't even like tap a shift knob somewhere left or right.
I didn't realize that. Oh my God.
There's no manual controls over shifting whatsoever. It's very strange.
Insane. That's so out of character.
It feels very out of character. I don't understand the decision. I don't have a problem with the gearbox. The gearbox is pretty good, but there's times where I want to hold the gear longer or I want to immediately downshift, and I just did not have that option.
The design decision must be driven by, I guess they think that eventually all Minis are going to be EVs and they don't need shift levers or anything. I don't know. That's so bizarre.
That I mean, I guess that could be maybe an explanation you would sell in a board meeting. It feels really disconnected.
I'm very good at that.
It feels disconnected from the real world and how these cars are actually used. The car is pretty quick. It does 60 in like 6.2, probably faster than that if you had a nice prepared surface. It doesn't feel super fast. Like passing on the highway, it'll do it, but it's not blazing or anything. And on the back roads around here where I often have to pass slower traffic because people just don't pay attention, it worked okay. Like he wasn't white knuckling it through a passing zone. But what you do get with the 221 pound-feet of torque is a fair amount of torque steer.
Oh, really?
Yeah. When you're accelerating off the line, the steering wheel will wiggle on you. It's quite noticeable,
Interesting.
more so than I would think for that level of power production. Like it feels like I don't normally these days, most of that's been dialed out, or maybe just I've been blessed by driving so many of the performance models that have been given limited slip front differentials, which I don't think this car has. So that would be on my list of things I would want for the car. But it's reasonably fuel efficient. 39 miles per gallon on the highway, I think, and 32 combined. That's not that's fine. I mean,
That's pretty fine, yeah.
For a performance car like this, or quote unquote sporty car. The only other weird, the handling is okay. Like it can be
stiff. Does it feel like
it does feel stiff? It will bounce you around. What's interesting is there's 7 drive modes, I think.
Excuse me?
But only 3 of them really impact how the vehicle drives in a noticeable way. There's like a
7. What could the 7 possibly be?
Well, because Mini has combined its drive. They're called, I don't know if they're called drive modes or if they're called moods or something. They don't just affect like the way the vehicle drives. They affect the way the interior presents itself and the lighting and the infotainment screen and stuff like that. I believe it's 7, but the ones I noticed that had the most change was there's one called Core, which is just like the base model, the base regular drive mode. There's an eco mode, and then there's something called Go-Kart, where it gives you more throttle response and the steering stiffens up a bit. None of those changes impact suspension. Like there's no chassis settings, which is a little bit strange. You'd figure that maybe a car like this would come with adjustable shocks, but definitely not. But the real weird part of the drive modes is that when you change them, everything in the car like resets. So if you're listening to something like a radio station or a podcast or Spotify, it pauses and like the system reloads itself in the new mode with the new colors and backgrounds and stuff, and then goes back to what you were doing. I can't think of another car that does that.
Again, it seems like the thoughtfulness of the infotainment system was not there, right? Like something's not right with that.
Yeah,
that's too many drive modes in my opinion, though.
I mean, sure.
Especially if there's no adjustable suspension. Like, they're just doing moods now, yeah.
I'm going to confirm that there's 7, but I'm pretty sure I counted 7.
I remember, though, like,
7,
my favorite thing...
It's 7.
My favorite thing is that the previous... not last generation, but the generation before that used to have little messages on the screen, like, it would say, let's motor
and stuff.
Let's motor hard. I love that.
I think it makes a woohoo noise when you go into go-kart mode, but that's all I noticed. Like I didn't
woohoo
something like that. Like a celebratory noise. But the final piece of the Mini Cooper S puzzle is the pricing. This is not a cheap car. It is.
It's never been. It should have been, but it just has never been.
It starts at 32 in the US. And I believe in Canada it's 42.9, so 43,000. That's a lot of money for this car. But what's interesting is it's a very marginal upgrade over the regular Cooper, which is like 29,000. So it's only a 10% increase, and I could see someone going for that. It makes sense for me to do, especially since I think like the mileage is almost the same, even though you're getting more power, which is kind of weird. Anyway, that's a lot of money, Sammy. You can get a bunch of different cars when you're in the early $30,000 mark. And in Canada, around 40 grand for sure, you can target not around 40 grand, above 40 grand. There's a lot that's out there. So that kind of makes me feel as though the Mini is still being targeted towards Mini buyers. And I know it sounds kind of obtuse to say that, but what I mean is there's always been a core group of people who are fashion first when they're looking at cars. Mini has been in touch with those buyers, and it's managed to make a good sustainable business out of attracting them to its showrooms. And I think that this car will continue to do that. I do think it's a bit of a misstep to not fully embrace the sportiness of it with the paddle shifters. And I, not totally sold on the infotainment, but I think that if you already like Mini, you will like this car. I'm not sure I could recommend it to someone as like, hey, you've driven a Mini in the past and it wasn't for you, but this is the one that will convince you.
Right.
I don't think it's quite there.
But that's okay. I think, I know it sounds ridiculous to say that. Mini has its core buyer, and they want to recapture people who would buy a mini, or they want that personality of a mini. I don't think they're going for people who would get a traditional or normal vehicle, a mainstream vehicle. They're looking for something a little bit out of the mainstream, and I think the mini achieves that for the most part, right?
Yeah, and there are obviously sacrifices that go with it, because even though it is a compact, it's still pretty. I mean, it's good if you're sitting in the front, but it's not at the top of the class when it comes to rear seat room or cargo room. And I think that that's a good place to kind of segue into the vehicles that you drove recently, because I think one of them is a direct competitor in a way to the Cooper S, at least in terms of how it's marketed. And I think that it actually improves on those areas specifically, which would speak to customers who are, you know, not fully bought in on the mini styling and design concept, but are shopping more with the practical part of their brain.
Yeah, I mean, I went to where did I go? Nashville to drive the 2025 Honda Civic Si, as well as the Honda Civic Hatchback Hybrid. So let's talk about the Civic Si, which is a staple of like sport compacts, right?
Is it like, did you drive a sedan or did you drive a hatchback, or
as far as I understand, the Civic Si is only available as a sedan.
Is that true in both countries?
In your country and my country?
Yes.
I think it's true. Yeah, all around. Yes.
Okay.
I don't know when the last time there was a Civic. I think the last generation Civic Si was available as a coupe.
Okay.
And I want to tell you straight up, I really liked the last generation model. And I just want to be clear here. I liked it quite a bit, mainly because it had a couple of features that I think were really forward thinking and special for a Honda Civic Si.
When you say last generation, so is the version that you drove a complete redesign? Or what's the deal?
No, I mean, the Si has been around in this generation, I think, since 2022.
Okay.
And then I want to talk about the model that was before 2022. It had that like angular look. It wasn't particularly attractive. That's my personal opinion, of course.
Hey now.
But the old Si used to be available with adjustable suspension, something that you talked about in your mini review. And for this generation, they removed that. And if you want adjustable suspension, you're going to have to get it in a Acura, I believe, because the Integra basically is a Civic Si with Acura's design language and approach. So,
now, do you think that they weren't selling enough Acuras? Is that
well? The Integra was new with this generation of Civic.
Ah, okay. So they're just deciding to create the space between them.
Yeah, the split. So that's one of my biggest things when I was looking at, you know, the Civic Si nowadays it wasn't one of my favorite options because it feels like Honda limited what it used to be. And now they've actually given back to the Civic Si in this 2025 model year refresh. They've decided to give it a bunch of features that it didn't have before. Some things are actually worth mentioning. Other things are a little bit they feel like throw-ins. So, you know, heated seats now. I don't know if that's like great. Like, wow, you did it. But even though we finally made the Civic Si have heated seats. Cool. Way to go, guys. Pat yourselves on the back. But other interesting things that are worth pointing out with the new Civic Si is that it takes a couple of things from the Type R. I know that sounds really promising, but the thing in particular it took was the shift lights from the Civic Type R.
So is that like essentially lines of code for the gauge cluster?
No, it's a string of LED lights that are above the gauge cluster.
Okay.
That like light up and come together in the middle when it's time to shift.
Seems like it could have been something they programmed into the gauge cluster. I'm not complaining, but like it's odd to do that.
Additionally, the Civic Si is one of the few vehicles that is only available with a manual transmission, something your Mini did not have.
Yeah.
Didn't even have a gear stick.
Thank you for bringing that up. You know, I didn't mention that in my review, but this is, I think, the first Cooper S to not come with a manual option in North America.
I remember us talking about this during the pandemic because I think Mini said they can't make manuals during the pandemic due to a parts shortage or something.
Well, the manual disease was an underreported thing. It killed so many manuals. It was a disaster, and we still haven't recovered. Certainly not Mini.
I think me and you, either we talked about it on the podcast or off the podcast, but we're like, this is just a precursor to them being like, yeah, forget about the manual, okay?
Yeah, they were trying to let us down easy.
Yes. But this is available with a manual transmission. It's a very nice shifting manual transmission. I think Honda has been one of the best automakers at making manuals. It also has a rev matching feature. It's been changed this year a little bit. One of the biggest complaints with Civics is that they have a rev hang, which is this thing that kind of makes some shifting, process a little bit clunky.
Yes.
And this one's improved that a little bit. And then another thing that they've done is they've incorporated rev matching downshifts. Now, Pen, did you know that the old Civic Si with rev matching downshift did not rev match from second to first?
Well, I can see why.
Right?
It doesn't seem. Yeah, that's.
Well, good news. They've incorporated the second to first rev match downshift.
Do you think that speaks to the creeping state of traffic across this continent, where that's in order to have fun now, you're going to be traveling at speeds so low that you need a rev matching for that 2-1 shift?
I mean, rev matching into first is a pain in the butt.
Why are you downshifting into first to begin with?
Sorry, in motion, it's awful. It's
right? It's a rare
clunky
thing to do.
move.
It's the thing that I do when I'm in a very loud car and I want to be obnoxious to the max, where I'm constantly downshifting.
So I guess that is to point out the fact that the Civic Si is more of a commuter car than some of the other sport compacts on the market, like the BRZ we were talking about last week, which is actually more of a entry-level sports car rather than a sport compact.
Well, I mean,
right?
it's a commuter car in the sense that it's a compact sedan, but I don't know that you could call a car that's available exclusively with a manual transmission a commuter car.
I really do think it is, because they've also included a whole bunch of other features. Honda Sensing, which is their suite of safety technology, is available now on the Civic Si, and all of the features that you see in other Hondas is now on the Si, which I don't think was the case before.
What about a ghost hand that extends from the dashboard and shifts the car for you? Is that a thing?
This is not a feature of Honda Sensing. I don't know why you think it is.
I don't know. I just got to get that.
Dream.
Maybe I was thinking like Honda 6 Sensing.
Oh, right, of course.
Yeah.
So it has adaptive cruise control, lane keeping. It has, it's improved its, what's it called? Forward collision warning system and crash prevention system, with cyclist and motorcycle detection now, which is cool. I didn't use that. I couldn't use that, of course. I didn't test it. And another really important thing about the Civic is that it has two really innovative airbags. Another thing I did not test in the front passenger airbag has like a 3-chamber kind of design. It cradles the head of the passenger in the case of an accident, so that
what if they're just lonely?
No, you can't. You can't just manually activate the
cradling
airbag. Yes.
Okay.
So what that does, it prevents sort of like torsion or twisting of the neck when you're in a car accident. Or a collision. Sorry, I shouldn't call them accidents. They're collisions.
Why not call them accidents?
Because sometimes they're not accidents.
Okay. Wow.
Driver,
you're not on the stand here right now. I just want to remind you, you're not under oath.
The driver airbag has a similar function. It has like a sort of like donut kind of like design. It's not like it's got a gap in the middle, because that would be dangerous, but it has like
but so delicious.
More cushioning on the sides to prevent, again, twisting of the head, which would cause more brain damage and spinal damage or neck damage, which is interesting. Again, it's to showcase that the Civic the Civic Si is an all-arounder. I don't think it's particularly like, wicked to drive. It's fun.
You haven't mentioned what it's like to drive yet. And you haven't mentioned the engine that comes with it.
Oh, I haven't. Okay. It's the same engine as before. It's the 1.5 liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine that has 200 horsepower and 192 pound-feet of torque.
So like very similar to the Mini, except with a torque deficit.
Yeah. I want you to remember that torque figure, and I'll repeat it later because there's something going on here. This vehicle, though, does come with a standard limited slip differential.
Okay.
I did not notice any torque steer, and I did find it to be pretty easy and quick to get up to speed. I enjoyed that. I would say it's probably a six-ish second sprint to highway speeds.
Okay.
Which I think is pretty good for a compact car.
Sure. I mean, again, right in line with the Mini Cooper.
Yeah, I wonder, how much faster you really need to get without getting into the Type R sort of territory.
What kind of pricing are we looking at here?
We're looking at a starting price of, including destination, $31,000. And there's one option that you can get with this car, and that is summer tires. That is an extra $300, which I think is actually a pretty good deal.
So it's super underscoring the fact that this car and the Mini Cooper line up when it comes to price, when it comes to performance, when it comes to power, except for the fact that Honda's maybe the only company out there right now building a manual only car.
Yeah.
Is there another company?
A manual only car? Yeah. I don't know. I mean, in this class, definitely not. I don't think so.
In any class.
GLI is even available. A Jetta GLI is available with a dual clutch, right?
Of course.
And I think that's the key competitor there. But then other vehicles in this class include something like the 2.5 liter version of the Mazda 3, and maybe even the turbo versions of it, which have a ton of power, like 250, I think. And that's a lot. The other thing to mention actually is that it comes with an improved interior in terms of infotainment system. You get a 9-inch infotainment screen with Google built in, is what they call it.
Is it
Google
circular?
Built in.
Is it circular in the middle?
It is not circular. It's not even a squircle. It is just a square.
Okay.
Or a rectangle. And it has USB-C ports as well as wireless Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. I want to point out something kind of funny.
Okay.
The drive program I was on made a big deal about these Google integration, the Google integration of the infotainment system, which means that there's a bunch of Google services built into the car that you don't need to use your phone. Yet when they told us they gave us a route, and we had to use our phone and then pair the phone with the car and use wireless Android, Apple, and Apple CarPlay to use the route.
So they couldn't program it into the car for whatever reason. Or
that is not a function of built-in Google Maps.
Or was it more likely that they didn't want to individually program it into each individual car at the program?
I guess that's probably it. But we've been on programs that have done that.
Sure.
In
the dark ages.
Yeah, sure.
We've been on programs with paper maps.
That's fair. I always loved those with the little mileage markers.
Yeah, the lamination, and you can flip it and stuff, and it was fun.
I love the lamination because they know that journalists, one, have, sometimes we've been eating in the car or eating before we got in the car. Or sometimes we have open cups in the car. Yeah. Anyways, it's just something to point out. I mean, if you're going to showcase the feature or talk a big game about the feature in the vehicle, try to encourage us to use built-in Google while we're on the event, and not encourage us to use our smartphone, which we've been using hopefully for a while, right?
Tell me a little bit about the hybrid.
So the hybrid is actually really is something a little bit more important for me to talk about, because this is the first time that the hatchback version of the Civic has been available with the hybrid motor. Okay. Now we've had the hybrid before in the Civic lineup. You can get it in the sedan currently, and I think now you're going to be able to get it probably like this month or next month in the hatchback. And this is pretty cool because this powertrain gives 200 horsepower as well as 232 pound-feet of torque. 232 pound-feet of torque is 40 pound-feet more than the SI.
How much heavier is the car?
It's a good chunk heavier. I would say it's around 3,300 pounds, while the SI is around 3,000 pounds.
So you're looking at the weight of the battery and then the instant torque from the battery, I'm assuming, is what's filling in the gaps here on the torque side.
Yeah. And they've also changed. I mean, we're all familiar with this two-motor hybrid system that Honda has. It's pretty much the same setup as you would find in the CR-V and the Accord, and as I mentioned, the Civic sedan. But they've refined the CVT, which is always like a weak point in some of these vehicles. I think a lot of people have just come to realize that a CVT is like a compromise, right? Like, this is how we're going to deal with these EVs and keep them efficient and responsive. But Honda has decided to program in some kind of like fake shifts with the CVT.
Okay.
And it's fairly effective. It makes the car feel a little bit more traditional. But apparently, if you just hammer on the throttle from a stop sign, like you just want to go as fast as you can from a stop, it will forego that programming and just pin it and get you going as quickly as you can. So the other thing to point out here is that the Civic Hatchback Hybrid delivers 50 miles per gallon in the city and 48 miles per gallon combined, which is very good.
And what do you have to pay for the privilege?
This is one of my biggest pain points because in North America, in the U.S., the hatchback just with the gas motor starts at $28,000. The hybrid, the cheapest hybrid you can get is $31,000. It's the same price as the Civic Si. So at that point, you're basically trying to decide whether or not you want fuel efficiency or a manual transmission, or 50 mpg versus I think 31 mpg in the Civic Si.
Clearly, very different buyers, right?
Yeah, totally different buyers. Despite the fact that honestly, the hybrid is fairly fun to drive. It's pretty quick in a straight line. I don't think you totally notice that extra 300 pounds of weight. But we weren't really putting them on a track or anything like that.
But the engagement is radically different.
Yeah, totally different. You're right. And then the top of the line sport touring model in the US is $34,000. And it pains me to say this, but in Canada, this car is $40,000. And to me, that is a price point that a Civic should not be, encroaching on.
It is hard to imagine paying that much for a Civic. And I would really be curious as to how many years it takes to make back the price differential between like a 32 mile per gallon Civic and the Civic Hybrid.
Totally. I don't think you'll be able to pull it off that difference.
Yeah, probably
within 10 years.
Yeah, not within like a lease period. That's for sure.
So that's one of my biggest pain points, at least for like I said, for the Canadian buyers. I think you've been given a pretty bad go of it here with the pricing of the hybrid, but the SI is still a pretty good choice, 37,000 Canadian, and I think that's an easier pill to swallow.
Any final thoughts on the Civic?
No, I mean, the Civic has now grown up, right? Like it's now and it's similar to how we mentioned about the Mini. It's a all-rounder. And I think that's both a benefit and a detriment. At least the Mini that you mentioned has some whimsy. It has 7 drive modes.
I think it has some whimsy. You're right.
Character, especially with the interior of the cabin, all of that
character
stuff.
Inside for sure.
And so when you're spending, when they've increased the price of the vehicle and put it over that $30,000 mark, you're getting something kind of like tangible, unique. You have like personality from the brand that's being injected into the vehicle. And then with the Civic, I think the Civic has to cover so many bases. It has to be an entry-level vehicle. It has to be maybe someone's first car or a student or a college student's first car. And then when you get to these higher trim levels, these hybrid powertrains or these SIs, you've got different audiences. You've got enthusiasts. You've got people who are maybe doing shorter commutes or longer commutes, or you've got all sorts of different people who would buy this car. And as a result, it's trying to do so many things at the same time. And I think it kind of like loses itself in the process.
But I mean,
and you've just got like a generic car now.
But the SI, I mean, it has a manual transmission, which is pretty unique in its segment.
Yeah, I don't think you can get a manual in the, what is the name of the Elantra N line? I think that's a dual clutch transmission only. I think the GLI comes with the manual. You might have to double check for me on that, but that sounds right.
Yeah, it does. Actually, I drove one this year, so yes.
And I think that's it.
Yeah.
Right?
All right. Well, wrapping things up.
But it's important to talk about that GLI because we've spoken about it in the past because
I drove it.
Yeah, and we came away kind of like lukewarm on it, I think.
Yes, because
I would say
it's a big and somewhat bloated vehicle at this point in its life.
I would say that this is a tiny bit less bloated feeling. The SI is a little bit less bloated feeling. It's still a big car, but that manual transmission does a lot of heavy lifting for it, and ensures that you will have some engagement with the car.
So if you want to reach out to us and talk about your engagement with cars, or what the wisdom is behind offering a vehicle that only has a manual transmission in an era when almost nobody drives manual transmissions anymore,
or spending $40,000 on a Civic.
Yeah,
that is not the Type R.
There's a bunch of ways you can share your feelings with us. The easiest way is to just go to the website unnamedautomotivepodcast.com and fill out our contact form. That ends up in our inbox. Or you can find us on social media. Both of us are at Instagram. Sami is at Sami_ha, like you're laughing. I'm at Hunting Benjamin. Or you can email us the old-fashioned way, benjamin@benjaminhunting.com. If you do enjoy the podcast, please, listen to us a whole bunch, subscribe, leave some reviews, tell your friends about us. That's the best way to kind of get the word out about the podcast and help keep the lights on here. And if you want to help to keep the lights on in a less figurative and more transactional way, you can go to our Ko-Fi and buy us a coffee there, or leave a donation for the podcast itself. There's a link in the show notes. Sami, what are you going to be driving next week?
Next week, I'm driving the Fiat 500e, which is an electric car with limited range.
Yeah,
you're jealous because you were supposed to get it, right?
Yeah, well, it's on its way. Let's put it that way. I just don't know if it has enough range to get from Montreal to my house. So we're gonna.
Yeah, I have that. I have those concerns.
We're gonna find that out. I'm gonna be driving and talking about a vehicle that you recently drove, but I drove a different version, and that's the Acura ZDX. Except this time, I got the the A spec, and I believe you drove the Type S.
That's right.
So there's a pretty big performance difference there. I'm kind of in the everyday version of the car, so curious to see how that shakes out.
Yeah, me too. I can't wait to see how we pull that off.
All right. Thank you for listening, everybody.
See ya. Bye.